Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this week's Middle Nation Content Talks. This is our third episode since we started, and I think we're going to learn a lot from what Brother Shahriar has to say. So, Brother Shahriar is going to speak about the video called Ceasefire Now or Else, which is on the Middle Nation YouTube channel. He's going to speak about the topic for up to 20 minutes. He's allocated about 20 minutes to present his insights and his thoughts on this intriguing topic. So, Brother Shahriar, welcome. The floor is yours.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I would like to thank Sr Nisa for having me present this discussion today. Last week, Mr. Bolsen had critiqued the slogans Free Palestine and Ceasefire Now, suggesting that or else in the end, signifying that there will be consequences, and provided extensive reasoning. The West will face consequence for their actions. It's not a matter of if, more a matter of when and how. For when the USA is ousted from the UN or a lasting, impactful reform are a reality, I would like to present some other ideas. As customers in Muslim countries, we can actively incentivize our organizations to work with Muslim companies to build Muslim private sector power instead of their American counterparts. As we've seen with the boycott Starbucks movement, we can apply the same core principle in different areas. For example, for some countries, they can demand their governments to cooperate with Muslim nations instead of the USA. Like the biggest American export is weaponry. If countries who rely on their arms on the USA were to make other nations take their arms from other nations, it would be a massive blow to the American economy. Moreover, BRICS nations can play a massive role in this. BRICS members can severely undermine the American economy with a collective economic siege. We know the USA heavily depends on the natural resources held by the global South. If countries were to act like the Israeli protesters at Rafah and not let any capital nor resource enter American shores, they will feel the burn. The GCC and Russia hold most of the oil and gas, thus controlling the global fuel prices. India and China are the two largest populations, so USA naturally depends on them for high-skilled workers. If these countries were to suddenly not cooperate with the USA or issue a state level or big business level boycott, it will worsen the fallout after the US expulsion from the UN. It is also to note that USA will no longer be a notable player in the security of Africa. Russia's Wagner Group, with the assistance of fellow BRICS countries, Saudi Arabia, have already been very successful in replacing France and the US in majority of the security concerns in the Sahel region. The Arab League has normalized relations with Syria last year. With this continued trend of establishing regional stability, America's stooge, Israel, will have no choice but to step away from Zionism and make concessions for Palestine. The USA will be left out on all major deals and agreements that have an impact on the global stage. The China brokered Saudi-Iran deal, the rapprochement between Turkey and Egypt, Russia becoming the new security guy in Africa, these are all but a hint to what's come. The Saudi Emirati soft empire in Africa and the Middle East will root out any American authority within the region. We've seen how the ICJ ruling has affected Israel. They're being denied support from all around them. Even their European allies are terrified of doing business with them as a result of the genocide ruling. The West has painted the Russian president as a war criminal after the start of the war in Ukraine. Let's say if America were to be sued and found guilty in supporting Israeli genocide, they can very well be subjected to the same scrutiny they like to champion against everyone they've opposed. In conclusion, I would like to say, besides the consumer boycotting and UN expulsion, I think this level of boycotting from the state and the private sector levels will do well in setting up appropriate consequences for the United States. The USA will be isolated, boycotted, subjugated with the same way they did to the world. We demanded free Palestine. We demanded ceasefire now, or else things like this await them. Thank you for hearing, everyone.
Thank you, Brother Shafia. I do have a question for you, a follow-up question on what you've just spoken about. Thank you for your thought-provoking contribution. With regards to the BRICS Plus nations playing a role, can you elaborate on what kind of specific actions these countries could collectively take to achieve an economic siege against the United States?
Thank you for the question, sister. Um, You see, the BRICS nations all have their specialities. They can act like a collective, but all have different parts to play. It's like the Hydra attacking, but this time there's no overcoming it. If we were to take, for example, the American education industry, the international students contribute over $40 billion to the American economy. More than half of these students come from just China and India, both BRICS nations. If these two countries were to halt their people from going to America, kind of similar to how India was feuding with Canada a few months ago, it can make the US lose about $20 billion a year. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, all three, which are BRICS nations, can cooperate and make global oil prices hell for America. We've seen what oil prices can make the US act like. While we don't need the exact same outcome as like the great late King Faisal did, may Allah have mercy on him, the goal is to make disrupt the American hegemony, as I like to say. But as for South Africa, they can do what they did best. They sued Israel, brought their injustices before a court. Since they sued Israel, it's not a distant reality that America can share this fate. Meanwhile, Iran continues to be a headache for the USA. So they can undermine American efforts in their own way. And just recently, we've seen the Brazil's part where they totally circumvented the American dollar to the China-Brazil currency swap. I may have missed some countries, but it is quite clear to say that each country can target America in their own way, one by one, in synchronization, and thus achieving a collective economic siege against the USA.
Thank you for that. And the last follow-up question that I have for you is, while boycotting the United States is a strong statement, wouldn't there be repercussions for the countries that are boycotting the United States as well? What do you think these strategies could, what that might achieve with these disruptions?
The USA is like a dying empire. They do not have the same reach as they did during the Cold War. It is to note that boycotting is not as simple as ditching US products and services and calling it a day. If done wrong, indeed, it can have a great risk of damaging one's own economy. If overt boycott is not an option, then it can very well be more covert. It means to first build up one's own industries and becoming self-reliant, while also increasing cooperation with the BRICS nations. Take Turkey for an example. They have been purchasing Russian-made weapons, even as a NATO member state. Most global South countries do not depend on the USA. They rely on China and Russia for their armament, and this trend is only going to get more common as America loses ground. I have to say that the USA has disrupted world peace time and time again. It's So it's not unfair to assume when their reckoning comes, it will cause great disruption. The disruption is key for us to weaken the Zionist state Israel and attain victory for Palestine. However, I'm sure there are better ways to do this. I will leave that to Brother Shahid or someone else from the meeting.
Thank you for that, Brother Shafia. If anybody else has anything to contribute, now's your time. The floor is yours, please. Brother Shahid, if you have something that you'd like to add, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, I think it's certainly an interesting idea, an interesting proposal, and justified, no question. I think that how you would approach something like that is where it becomes more complicated, and where you would have to take try to look as strategically as possible at, for example, what are the major. I mean, there's two sides of it, right? There is boycotting American goods and services, what America exports, and then there is boycotting or sort of the embargo of what they import. So countries that are importing to the United States withhold those imports or deny those imports to the United States. I think there you would have to look at specific sectors. I mean, you mentioned that that weapons is the major export of the United States, which isn't exactly accurate. It's a major export, but it's not the most important or the most lucrative export. I think at this moment it's oil and gas, and that's mostly going to Europe. Their imports, let's say, what do they import? They import a lot of raw minerals. They import pharmaceuticals. I mean, you would have to look at what are they importing and what are they exporting to the global south? Because already in a lot of the countries in the global south, the main country that they're importing from already is China. That's not to say that that a boycott of American products would be useless, but America doesn't produce that much, to be honest. They've largely lost their manufacturing base as it is, and you would have to look at what are the actual products that our countries are importing from them, and what those sectors are, and then you would have to look at potential replacements for those sectors, or if replacements already exist domestically in those countries and have maybe been undermined by trade agreements that require them to import from the United States. And then, as I said, another key thing would be exporting to the United States could be embargoed. And now I think that to a certain extent, just as you were talking about, brother, the shift is already underway. The transition is already underway, and the process of what they're calling deglobalization is underway, where the United States is already moving towards, to a certain degree, they're moving in a direction of self-isolation economically, of disengagement economically from the world as a nation. And that doesn't mean necessarily the owners and controllers of global financialized capital who are based in the United States are thinking about withdrawing from the rest of the world. I think that they're thinking about withdrawing from the United States to a certain extent, depending on what industries we're talking about. Right now, I feel like, as I've talked about many times, the United States is focusing on the destabilization of Europe and increasing the dependence of Europe on America, specifically for oil and gas, energy, and so on. So, I mean, it's the idea. Let's see, because what they seem to be wanting to do is to sort of impose, like I said, a sort of degree of self-isolation and disengage America from the global economy. They again, I'll specify. I'm talking about the actual national economy, not specific businesses or the OCGFC, but America as an economy is sort of in the moving in the direction of self-isolation and protectionism. And And I think that to a certain extent that has to do with simply the rise of China, the rise of the global South, and demographics has a lot to do with it, as I've talked about many times. And I think that they see that their main, how can I say this? I don't want to say sphere of influence really, but their sphere of exploitation is going to be in the Western Hemisphere, in the Northern Hemisphere, and they're going to be focusing on their former allies in Europe, to subjugate and exploit them and subordinate them. So to a certain extent, what you're talking about, I think, like, in order for it to be an or else, it would just be an acceleration of what's already happening, which I think is a good strategy, because I think that as I did a video about the about Article 6, I believe, and how this is a strategy that is moving along an already existing momentum. So I think that to accelerate the isolation of the United States, maybe not according to their timeline, it would be something that would be effective, and it would be something that would not necessarily be challenged or fought, because it is already sort of moving in that trajectory as it is. It's already moving with a momentum in that direction. So I think it's something that we could certainly think about trying to pursue and figuring out. As I said, if we were going to try to pursue something like that or try to promote something like that, then we have to get detailed. We have to start getting detailed and look at sectors and look at analyze the imports and exports of the United States and of the most important countries that are exporting to the United States or that are importing from the United States, and then look at how they can bolster their own resources to accommodate for whatever losses they might incur by boycotting and embargoing the United States.
I suggested this economic siege as a response. We already know that they're being isolated. They're partly done this to themselves, but you see their continued hampering of world peace, their insistent support for the Zionist murder state Israel, and this has already destroyed any amount of global respect on a global stage they might have had. So I think we can say that they did not stop the genocide in Palestine. So this is what all these global South countries are collectively doing as a response. They will be, USA will be isolated, but this allows us to accelerate that rate with this specific notion in mind.
Right. Yeah, that's what I understood. The other thing that I was going to mention, I think, if I think that I'm remembering correctly, what I wanted to say was with regards to what you said in terms of the United States themselves being charged with complicity in genocide. And I think that is something that they very much fear and anticipate if things keep moving the way they're moving. Because, in fact, the South African, what is she, the foreign minister, Pandor, she had a statement, I believe it was yesterday, or earlier in the week at a panel discussion, was saying that this is anticipated, this is expected, that if they get a guilty verdict at the ICJ for Israel, then the next logical sort of cascading consequences of that will be anyone and everyone who has enabled Israel to carry out the genocide will be held complicit and will be charged with complicity in genocide. And obviously, the first one on that list is going to be the United States. And the first specific enablers of that will be not only politicians, but Raytheon, Boeing, all of the companies that are supplying Israel with the weapons. And I saw something where Ro Khanna, the congressperson, the Muslim Rohingya congressperson, I think he's in California, was questioning Lloyd Austin about the delivery of weapons to Israel, and that the UN had said that that the delivery of weapons to Israel puts at risk anyone who's doing that with puts them at risk of charges of complicity in genocide and complicity of war crimes, because there is obviously substantial evidence that war crimes are being committed, even if they decide that it's just shy of genocide. They are crimes against humanity, and it is against international law to provide war criminals with weapons. And America is doing it nonstop. So there is every reason to believe that America will, at some point, be charged with complicity in genocide. And I think that that's something that they're very cognizant of, and I think that that's something that weapons companies are very cognizant of.
Jazakallah for that. Is there anybody else that we can call on that would like to contribute? Do we have Sister Waheeda present? Sister Waheeda, can we please call on you?
Well, assalamu alaikum, everyone. I, of course, support Ustad's position on this. And frankly, as old as I am and what I've witnessed, I really have not seen anything move as fast as actually the economic consequences with regard to Starbucks and the boycotting that has taken place there. And I'm thrilled. I'm surprised, though, I must admit, because I just haven't seen anything take off like this momentum wise and really gain traction in a particular part of the world, so that it's really changing, it's really altering some of the economic decisions that people are making. So that's really all I have to say. I'm very hopeful, but the speed with which some of these positive occurrences are happening just further strengthens my belief that Brother Shahid provides some of the leadership that the Muslim Ummah needs at this day and time, and that it is Allah who is blessing his campaigns with so much success, because they're really based in following and in doing things the way that we should do them. That's all. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brothers and sisters. I was going to ask something. There's an academician came here about 6 months ago in Turkey from Australia, talking about how it is important for the West to be connected through trade and international relationships to other parts of the world in order to restrain themselves from being violent as they were in the medieval times. And I should say it's quite an important point, because if we see that isolation brings a lot of misguided things into mind, especially in the case of Iran, as we see many of the things they are doing in the Middle East is detrimental to the works of the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Similar thing could happen, if you say so, would happen in America's case. What would be the possible result, do you think? If we were able to exclude them from the United Nations and sever the ties of trades, international relationships with them, would they become more violent because they're going increasingly doing irrational actions, and I fear they will act more stupid if we go that way. Would there be how can I say it? Would there be an action they could take that will really harm the future of all humanity? And how we can prevent it if we have another way to pursue of this matter?
Personally, I don't think. As I said, I believe that the isolation, economic isolation of the United States, is something that's already being pursued to one degree or another by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. And I think that, as I said, I don't think that it's something that they would necessarily fight. They would probably they would definitely like it to be done according to their timeline. So if, as Brother Shahryar suggested, if we accelerate that, they may be reluctant about that, and they may sort of resist it to one degree or another. But they're also pragmatic business people, so they will adapt to whatever the momentum is and whatever direction that momentum is moving. In my opinion, and I think that simply because of the fact that the state has been more or less captured in America by the private sector, I don't really see the state making decisions that would be disapproved of by the private sector. I don't think that they would. I mean, as I've said, I think that to a certain extent, this explains why we haven't seen a war with Iran, which is something that very clearly the neocons have always wanted, and if they ever had an opportunity to do it, it's now. But the BRICS nations, including the Gulf states, have been successful at de-escalating the ambitions, at de-escalating the violent ambitions of the neocons and of the politicians in America, where I think they have finally received the memo that a war with Iran is not welcomed by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, who have or who are in the process of switching sides. They're in the process of switching sides from being on the side of America to being on the side of the global South. That doesn't mean supportive of. That just means who they're aligning themselves with opportunistically, because obviously they are business people, so everything they do is opportunistic. It's not that they have a loyalty to the global South. They can see which side their bread is buttered on, and so they want to protect that side of their bread, which is the global South and the Arab world. So I think that, as I said, the isolation of the United States is already progressing and is already supported by the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. And I think that the response that you're talking about, the sort of violent, wild response, is more likely to be inflicted on the domestic population in America. I think they're more likely to take it out on the people, because the people are going to become unruly. And this is similar to in Europe, where I think that they are anticipating civil unrest by their own people because of the increasingly bad situation in Europe. And I think that the situation in America is going to become increasingly bad. And I think that they will be anticipating civil unrest. And I think civil unrest in America will be considerably more dangerous than civil unrest in Europe, considering the fact that everyone is armed. And you have some very, very zealous factions politically and religiously in the United States. And they're anticipating these sorts of problems. And I think that more likely you will have problems domestically and potentially between America and Mexico. But I don't think that there is much appetite actually for far-flung military adventures, much to the chagrin of the neocons, whose entire political platform is based on far-flung military adventures. But I think that as I've said many times, I think that the neocons are on their deathbed alongside with the Zionists in the next bed, and I think that the the uh, the, the the interests who control what the military does, because the military, it's been a long time since the military in America acted on the interests of their nation. They've been acting on the interests of business for many, many years now. And so, if it's not in the interest of business for them to engage in wild and violent affairs around the world, then I don't think they will. And I think that most of the military technology will be used to suppress the domestic population. Allahu alam.
Assalamu alaikum. I just want to say, um, here in the United States, about a decade ago or so, maybe 12 years, we found out what was happening with the leftover war materials that had been used in Iraq and had been sent back here. The federal government parceled them out to various local police departments across the country. So you have to understand that there's higher thinking going on with deciding to do that. They have armed the local police departments with things for massive warfare, things local police departments never had before.
Yeah.
They have developed here. I've actually seen the machine. They've developed a machine that produces a sonic wave of sound which can literally physically knock a populace down to the ground with its strength.
I remember
And
reading about.
yes, the NYPD actually has that. Um, there's a reason for this. They could have stored this stuff in the warehouses we have here. We have an extensive underground warehouse system in the United States, as well as those that are above ground. But instead, they gave this weaponry to local police departments. So anything that jumps off here could become major very quickly. The populace in the US today is much different than during the time of World War II or even the Vietnam War. The level of dissatisfaction in the populace, um, the number of arms per household, the kind of arms per household have changed because we had an assault weapons ban in place for a decade in this country. That ban was allowed to expire. And so Americans don't just have, pistols or a rifle. We have AK-47s and M16s
Yeah.
and all manner of things. So there's clearly some thinking about how to severely um, oppress and repress the public going on. So it's a very bad situation. I absolutely agree with Brother Shahid. The things that jump off will be internal, not external. This country has failed to win any war since Vietnam. The only thing we can chalk up is maybe going to the island of Grenada and being successful. But I'm sure Brother Shahid remembers Malcolm X said during the Vietnam era that America would never be able to win another ground war because the peoples of the world were losing their fear of the US. We were defeated in Vietnam, and we were defeated everywhere else. We have wreaked havoc and killed many people and wounded many people, but we didn't win. We didn't flat out win any of these wars. And the US is responsible for the instability in the Middle East region now, because what we did was we told the populace that there were three different groups in Iraq, and one was Shiite, and one was Sunni, and one was Kurd. Well, Kurd isn't a religion. It's an ethnic group, 95% of which are Sunni Muslims. So when we overthrew the Sunni ruling structure in Iraq, the Shiite, which was actually the minority, religiously speaking, was elevated. We did that. We had a media campaign to do that. The Kurdish guy who came to the U.S., Ahmed Chalabi, screaming about Saddam, was from the 5% of Kurds who are Shia. The American populace didn't understand that. And we were fed this diet of there's a minority, a violent minority ruling Iraq. So we're going to go in and, free the majority, when what we did, religiously speaking, was the exact opposite. And things have been topsy-turvy ever since.
Uh, you know, the military has given the police, as you said, so many weapons, so many military vehicles that they literally look like an invading army instead of the local police. It has a real effect on the minds of people. They do not feel like they're protected. They feel like the government is a separate thing from them, just trying to kill them. So this just causes more tension between the police and the population.
You're 100% right, Brother Shirar. You're 100% right. We've always had a National Guard that was armed with heavy weapons and armored personnel carriers. But we've never had local police forces with the kind of armaments that they have been given now. And you need to understand this. The local police forces did not buy this weaponry. It was a gift at the behest of the federal government. So this again, this is just nationwide. You have small, relatively small local police forces with all manner of advanced weapons of war. There's a reason for that.
I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 5 to 10 years you see tanks in New York City with the NYPD on the side of the tank. Didn't you just have over the last week or so, or I think it was last week, you had the National Guard in the subway system in New York, right?
The governor, Kathy Hochul, who is this woman is just insane. We have this is National Women's Month or International Women's Month. There are two women in control of the state of New York who are they're just out of their minds, Brother Shahid. One is our governor, Kathy Hochul, and the other one is our Attorney General Letitia James, and there are no more bloodthirsty men on earth than these two women. They're just crazy. And yes, Kathy Hochul has deployed, mind you, not the mayor of New York, the of New York City, the governor of New York State made the decision to deploy 750 armed members of the National Guard into New York City's subway system. It's because of crime in the subway system. It's just outrageous. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. We already have, I would say, 40,000 police officers in New York City. There are 29 to 32,000 that are acknowledged, and there are thousands more that aren't acknowledged because under law, the police department doesn't have to count them. They belong to all kinds of secret squads and whatnot. So there's about 40,000 members of the NYPD. We do not need 750 people carrying automatic weapons in fatigues, wearing fatigues in the subway system. When I moved to New York City in 1993, there was so much more violence and crime compared to today. It isn't even funny. And we didn't have, people carrying automatic weapons in the subways then. So it's just really various forms of repression and keeping the dissatisfied public under constant surveillance.
I just wanted to say one thing to clarify with regards to Iraq. It is actually a Shia majority by about 15%. It's not a Sunni majority country. And with regards to winning wars, this is something I've said before. America, I think, including in Vietnam, in fact, I don't think that America has been interested in so-called winning wars in the classic sense, in the traditional sense of the term. They haven't been interested in winning wars. Certainly not since the dismantling of the Soviet Union and the end of the so-called Cold War. I don't think they've been particularly interested in winning wars. The whole purpose of their wars was destabilization. They don't need to. I mean, in none of the wars that they fought in my lifetime really have had a clear or achievable purpose. Their only function was to destabilize and to prevent any other competitor to power in a regional power. So their main concern has always been, at least for the last 50 years or so, their main concern has been destabilization. And I think that destabilization and obviously funneling money into the military-industrial complex. And I think that as I've talked about, the logic of the military-industrial complex is no longer as applicable as it once was. And I think that the mission of destabilizing regions around the world is also no longer logically applicable with the transition to the global south. I don't think that the function of the function of American military interventions around the world serves the purpose that it once did. And I think that we're hopefully, inshallah, we're likely to see less and less of that. And I think, as I said, I'll just reiterate, I think that style of military intervention is more likely going to be taking place in America's own cities. And certainly, as Sister Waheeda said, they're certainly well armed to do that.
I should agree on that because as Julian Assange described it, when the US entered Afghanistan, Afghanistan has a relatively stable situation. Taliban has all but nearly eradicated opium production, and they had been given word of the UN officials back then about their achievements, $200 to $300 million for their eradication of opium. But the global economy, the global capitalist economy, doesn't like that, because they need a place for laundering money and funneling it to, as Brother Shahid said, to the armed tech companies. So they destroyed the situation in Afghanistan, and they gave power to the local warlords, who will oversee production of opium. And they collaborated with them, and in 20 years, Afghanistan jumped to the highest place in the opium production again, before Taliban took over again. That's why they are using a low profile right now. And the similar thing goes for Turkey right now. If we make something very outstanding, US will see us as a threat, and will try to undermine our stability, as they tried in the coup attempt in 2016, and will try to do it again in various places, whoever tries to challenge it. And I can say that a similar thing happened for Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, because they have openly challenged the rule, and they gave something like promise, like an attempt that we will bring stability to the region by helping Palestine in open grounds. That was also an undesirable situation for US dominance in global warfare. Basically, they destabilize other regions, so their production output will reduce compared to US, and the people's minds will be shattered. They won't, they can't produce, they can't make production or make innovation because of the destabilization in their region. It is also possible that they are forced to migrate to the West. Most of them are the intellectual people, which can be used for the growth of the Western economy. Right now they are being used, which is also a part of their internal clash right now, because their national people, descent migrated people. But apart from this, I'm going to ask another question. In 1970s, Turkey tried to liberate the Cyprus Turks from their Greek oppressors in the Cyprus, and while doing that, US and their NATO allies, which was our allies as well, embargoed us, and this helped our army tech grow substantially afterwards. Because of this military embargo, we built our own military vehicles, starting with ships and going with land vehicles, military equipment, and now we are building drones, and we are going very high speed. Uh, this helped us. If we isolate US, I believe this may help them a little bit as well, I fear. Uh, so I was thinking that should we sell them high-tech equipment with exploitations in regards and unprocessable other products like vegetable. So they are become dependent to us, to the global south. Would be a viable strategy for domesticating, I could say, US's possible destructive tendencies.
Yeah, I understand the question, and I mean what it comes down to is actually, you know, sanctioning a country, as we've seen with Russia, and also with Iran, and to a certain extent with Cuba. Uh, Very often, when you sanction a country, it actually becomes economically self-sufficient and stronger. And even you can say on a smaller level with Gaza, you know, what what the Israelis tried to do with Gaza never defeated them, and they became incredibly innovative to the point where they were able to run their cars on vegetable oil. So, you know, when you completely isolate a country, it does force that country to become self-sufficient, self-reliant. And as you said, with Turkey, mashallah. And it's sort of like an imposed protectionism from externally, an externally imposed protectionist policy. And protectionist policies are always good for the domestic economy, for growing the domestic economy, growing domestic manufacturing, and so on. So yeah, it is predictable that if the U.S. was economically isolated, then over the course of years or decades, it could uh, benefit from that. And I think, though, that this is something that, as I said before, this is something that they're moving towards anyway. They're moving towards a more protectionist, isolationist policy economically, with the idea being that, you know, they have largely lost their manufacturing base, and they would like to build it up again. So yeah, that's something that could happen. Now, in terms of creating dependency, that's not as likely, because America, subhanallah, is in an incredibly advantageous position as a country. It has significant resources. It has significant agriculture. Uh, it has a significant capacity for manufacturing if they invest in it. And it's, you know, it's you know, surrounded by two oceans, and it's sort of unreachable and untouchable. And it has the capacity for self-sufficiency. Whether or not after years or decades of isolation, if it builds its economy, it builds greater self-sufficiency. I mean, it should also be understood that to a great extent, America never has been anything but self-sufficient as a country economically. I mean, it's, you know, with globalization, America was one of the least globalized countries in terms of its as a beneficiary of globalization. The biggest beneficiaries of globalization were in Europe, not so much the United States. The United States still imports and exports less than you would think. It is quite self-sufficient as it is. So it's kind of hard to think about how you could actually make them dependent on anyone. The only thing that they used to be dependent about was oil and gas. But with the fracking revolution, they've obviously become like the leading producer and exporter of both oil and gas. So they've become self-sufficient in terms of energy. So it's hard for me to imagine a situation where America could become economically dependent.
I would like to address Brother Ercan's statement before the question itself. He said something along the lines of America destabilize. I kind of mixed it up, I guess, but America destabilizing countries and then making the intelligent population leave, and then those very people immigrating to the West, thus benefiting them. Like, it's a vicious cycle. I would like to know what Brother Shahid thinks on this dynamic.
Well, I think certainly that has happened. I think that the, the 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 educated populations usually don't require destabilization in order for them to leave. They're usually the first ones out. If like for example, Syria, most of the immigrants from Syria, for example, who are the professional class, the educated class, and so on, they left before the war actually started because they could see how things were spiraling. So now a lot of the immigrants are from the lower class, less skilled. I don't think that that's personally. I don't think that that's a motive. It's partially a consequence of the destabilization. I don't see it as a major driver. So, because they would rather. I mean, if you have, I mean, you can look at India, for example, or even China, where you have if you're an American company, would you rather have a highly skilled, highly educated professional working for you according to their local economy? Would you rather them come to America and you have to pay them American salaries? I don't think that it's a motive to try to bring educated people over to the United States. I think they would rather be able to reach those educated people where they are and pay them according to the local currency.
Brother Nail, is there something that you still wanted to ask?
Yeah, thank you, Nisa. Actually, I'd like to go back to the topic of invoking the Article 6 and just talk about, ask Brother Shahid very briefly about the competing European factions and what he thinks of the speech given by the representative from Hungary in the UN debate that happened last week, where he basically said that they do not want a war in the Middle East. So just want to hear his thoughts about that.
Yeah, I don't remember the specifics of his speech, but yes, I do recall him saying that they don't want a war in the Middle East and they would like everybody to calm down. I think that is reflecting the sentiment in Europe, and I think it's reflecting the sentiment in not necessarily in the, like, how can I say, in what I think is going to be the new focus in Europe. I think that Atlantic Europe is on the decline, and I think that Eastern Europe is going to be the more important focus. And I think that it does certainly reflect the sentiment. I think that there's almost a sort of like Hungary represents a kind of non-aligned sentiment that you see in some parts of Europe, where they would like to not, they're not BRICS, they're not part of BRICS, but they're also not particularly interested in taking sides in the Russia, America, Ukraine debacle, and they can sense, they can perceive the way things are going in Europe and the type of, in air quotes, ally that America is to Europe. I think that they're certainly more inclined to peace and harmony, and they don't have anything to benefit from war and conflict. So I don't have much to say about that, except that I think that his statement reflects a certain sentiment in Europe that traditional Western allies are less comfortable voicing, because they're very cognizant of being sort of kowtowing to America and placating the West, regardless of what they might really think, regardless of what their populations might really feel. And I think Hungary, as we know, Hungary is a bit of a pariah in Europe. I think the European Union is refusing to give them aid and assistance financially that they are due because of some disagreement, and sort of punish Hungary. So I think that you have these sort of somewhat independent, non-aligned voices that I think are not alone, but are you don't hear them as much because the traditional allies of the United States feel less comfortable speaking out.
Yeah, I think Hungary actually caved under EU pressure to, I believe, support a bill to fund Ukraine in the war, because, as you said, they felt the brunt of EU, well, not sanctions, but the threat. And speaking of the threat, I do have just a small question as well. I mean, when we talk about ceasefire or else, do you think that the threat is mightier than the execution? That if you have that leverage looming over the West, that's more important?
Yes, I think so. But I think that until recently, it was an empty threat. We could say or else, we could say we're going to do thus and so, but everyone knew that it wasn't really to be taken seriously because there was no real backing. But that's not the case anymore. Like I said, we're in the consequences phase now. BRICS is already acting. They're already coordinating. Things are already changing. The situation is already changing on the ground. So almost saying the or else is superfluous at a certain to some degree. It's almost superfluous to even say it because it's already happening. Countries are already. I mean, it's really astonishing in the very short period of time to see the change in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It's astonishing. If you have been familiar with the region at all for the last 10 years, just 5 years ago, it was unthinkable. And to a certain extent, it was unthinkable 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that you would find that Saudi Arabia and the UAE would join BRICS, which is globally seen as an anti-Western, anti-American alliance of countries. It was unthinkable. So the situation is changing drastically and very rapidly. So when you articulate what you can do in response, it's not as important. It's not. Inshallah, it's not even as necessary to actually follow through with it if they know that you can actually do it. Which is another reason why I was talking about earlier in an earlier video about Rafah, because Netanyahu said he's going to do such and such in Rafah. And then you had Egypt talking about it, you had Iran talking about it, you had Lebanon talking about it, you had the Arab League talking about it, you had all of these countries saying, well, if you do that, then we're going to do this. And usually when countries start talking like that, then nothing happens because you're at a so-called Mexican standoff. Everybody's got their guns drawn and no one's going to win if anyone fires. And so as long as you let everyone know that we have measures in place that we can take and we will take if you do such and such, or if you don't do such and such, then very often you don't even have to follow through. But you have to have the actual means to follow through in order for the threat to mean anything. But oftentimes, if you have the means to follow through on a threat, then you never have to follow through on that threat.
Thank you so much, everybody. So I think that is us concluding. I think a lot of key takeaways, we had a lot of them that we need to go back and think about. And once we become aware of something, it becomes easier to identify in other aspects of your life, in your community, in your society, which is why I also highly recommend listening to the recording, even if you were present. I find that when you go back and listen to things, something else catches your eye, or you understand something a little bit better. So it's a good exercise to go and listen to again. And inshallah, we will all benefit from what we are today, because there was a lot of knowledge dropped today. So I think with that, we conclude today's topics. And with that, I want to say thank you for your time, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.